Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton and special guest host Ray Attiyah here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Ray, how are we doing?
I am excellent, restless, but excited.
I know you are, and for good reason. We appreciate you kind of connecting us with today's guest and the story and the whole mission behind it. And I know it's one of personal interest for you, right?
It is. As we talked about on our last podcast, I surprisingly had the sale of 3 startups in a matter of a year. And then I'm like, where do I spend my time? Giving back. And Last Mile Food Rescue has been an amazing place to volunteer.
So now that you've let our cat out of the bag, yes, we have an excellent conversation teed up today as we're going to be talking about a nonprofit organization based in Cincinnati that's on a mission to save good food and get it to the folks that need it most. It's really going to be a fascinating story of logistics, leadership, purpose, and a lot more. Is that right, Ray? Do I have it right just about?
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. So let's dive right in with our special guest, Eileen Budo, Chief Operating Officer with Last Mile Food Rescue. Eileen, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks so much for having me on today.
It is really nice to meet you. Any friend of Ray's is certainly a friend of mine, and it's great to have Ray kind of joining me as a co-host to help interview the leadership behind one of our favorite charities and nonprofits that out there doing good work. So, Eileen, before we get into your professional journey, and before we get into more about what Last Mile Food Rescue is all about, let's get to know you a little better. Are you game for that?
I'm game for that.
All right. Wonderful. So, Eileen, where did you grow up? And you got to give us a good little bit on your upbringing.
Sure. So I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey. A lot of people say, gee, you don't sound like you're from New Jersey. And I don't think I ever sounded like I was from New Jersey, but certainly when I go back, my sister sounds like she's from New Jersey. But yeah, my whole family is still in New Jersey, New York. Came from a combination Irish Catholic, Polish Catholic family, and just really enjoyed good food, good family connection, and just really enjoyed a nice, wholesome upbringing.
Okay.
And yeah, so.
Well, you know what I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned food, and we were talking a little bit food on the front end as we all are working through our dietary initiatives in January. What is there one dish? And Ray, I think I asked you this question last time you were with us, because you also have some New Jersey ties. But Eileen, what is one dish when you think about your upbringing? What's that one? What's one of the dishes that really you could never separate from your childhood?
Well, that's a really hard question because I'd have to think about the holiday. So, considering the fact that we just passed Christmas, growing up, we would always spend Christmas Eve with my grandmother, my Polish grandmother. So we would always have pierogies on Christmas Eve. And, I never made them myself. I'm a pretty good cook, and I never made them myself. But this past Christmas, I decided I was going to go for it, and they turned out pretty good. As a matter of fact, I made them with my future son-in-law. And yeah, he did a pretty good job too. So
Awesome. All right, Ray, have you when's the last time you had a pierogi, Ray?
Oh, you know what? So I grew up in New Jersey, and some of my college friends were from the northern part of New Jersey, up in Caldwell area. So, and they were Polish. So we had pierogies quite a bit.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I haven't had it in Cincinnati, but growing up in New Jersey, I definitely had pierogies on a pretty frequent basis.
I love that.
I think every nationality, every culture has some type of a dumpling, and that's essentially what a pierogi is. For those that don't know it, it's the Polish version of an empanada. It's just a little piece of dough with some stuff inside that tastes really good.
Mhm. I think the ones that I remember were potatoes.
Mm-hmm. My favorite are sauerkraut.
All right. Time out. Y'all are killing me here. I'm gonna have to go out and find a dumpling at some point tonight. That's gonna break my diet pledge.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. I love your comment there, Eileen. Every society, every folks from every different background do have some sort of dumpling. I think I've seen a show on PBS along those lines. So sounds like part of your holidays were spent making great food with members of your family. Those are special memories.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that everybody is starving that are listening to this, wherever you may be listening to this, let's move to a little more food talk, because as we learned in doing some of our due diligence on our guests, you picked up a new hobby over the last couple of years. Tell us about that, Eileen.
Well, I picked up a new hobby during COVID, but I would say in general, food and cooking and that sort of thing has always been an interest of mine. So actually, when I retired, I went to culinary school in Cincinnati. My idea was that if I'm the best cook out of the laws and the in-laws, that all the kids would come back to my house for the holidays. So that's actually my real reason for taking up culinary school. But I also needed to make a transition after working for so many years. I needed to make a transition into a new industry, and I figured food was the place that I wanted to spend my time. But during COVID, you're kind of stuck inside with nothing to do. I was finishing up my culinary degree, and we went online, and that's like culinary school online is like, you might as well watch the Food Network, because it really changed my whole experience in culinary school. But I did decide to take up this whole concept of sourdough bread baking, and figured out how to make myself a starter and made some bricks, several bricks instead of bread, but eventually got pretty good at it. And now there's just way too many calories floating around my kitchen. So
But delicious calories, it sounds like.
yeah.
So I love sourdough bread. In fact, Eileen, when the farmers market is in season here in Monroe, Georgia, 6 months out of the year, whatever it is, there's one vendor that's always there. She does all kind of baking, and she's got the best sourdough bread. And she's kind enough, since you mentioned the starter, and I'm going to illustrate my complete lack of bread making prowess here in a second, but she offered to give my wife Amanda a piece of the starter dough. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's the way to do it. Otherwise, you've got a good 2.5 to 4 week wait time. And you hope you can figure out how to make the starter. But if somebody can give you a starter, that's gold dust. It's good. Take it.
Too good. It is too good. All right. Well,
And
thank you for. Go ahead, Ray.
And then you've got not just the taste of it, but just the smell of the home
Mm-hmm.
when you're baking.
Yeah,
Agreed.
absolutely.
Completely agree. All right.
And it's not always sour. Just so for some of your listeners that don't know about sourdough bread, it's not that it's sour. It adds a super richness to the bread. So I make a cinnamon bread, cinnamon sugar, that rolled stuff that you can get Sara Lee. I make a version of that with sourdough starter, and it is so delicious.
Man, so as we know now, we have set out and accomplished exactly what we all agreed not to do. But that's okay. That happens, and I really appreciate you sharing a little more about who you are as a person and what your passions are. I bet your culinary school experiences alone could write a book about. But for now, for today, the rest of our conversation here today, we're going to talk about more logistics-oriented aspects of your journey. Ray, where are we going next with our friend Eileen?
Well, Eileen just shared with us a little bit about growing up, where she grew up, and so forth. Now we want to get into a little bit of your professional journey and some of your journey before Last Mile Food Rescue. So you and Scott have something in common with your tenure at the Air Force. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what did you do at the Air Force?
Sure. So, I mentioned big family growing up and not a ton of money to pay for college, but I knew I wanted to go someplace different. And so I had an Air Force ROTC scholarship, actually, and I went to Wellesley College in Massachusetts, took my ROTC classes at MIT, and thought for sure, the Air Force would be a nice experience for me to get my college paid for. And, I'd spend some time working at Hanscom Air Force Base in Boston, and then, kind of go on my merry way. Well, that's not necessarily how it played out. I got an assignment to work in Air Force Systems Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I traveled a good bit when I was younger. I have relatives in Ireland, so it's not like I was, afraid to leave my hometown. But going to Dayton, Ohio, I thought, oh my gosh, that's not what I had in mind. But it turned out to be a really wonderful experience for me. So I was on a project called the Advanced Cruise Missile. It was a missile that hung on the bottom of a B-52. There was a version on the bottom of a B-1. Thankfully, we never used it because it's got a nice big nuclear warhead on it, but it was part of our, deterrence at the time. And it was a great experience for me. I was a project manager. But if I compare the work that I did in the Air Force, it was very similar then to the work that I started doing at Procter & Gamble, because essentially I was in procurement. The Air Force doesn't build anything themselves. They identify what their requirements are, and then we find defense contractors to fulfill those needs. And so I worked with companies like General Dynamics and McDonnell Douglas and Rockwell Engineering and those kinds of companies. And as a young professional, the amount of responsibility that I had was just incredible as I compared my experience in the Air Force to my colleagues, my friends, my peers from Wellesley or from MIT. I got a lot of responsibility as a young 22-year-old that I would not have gotten in the private sector. So it was really fun. And I met my husband.
Wonderful.
I met my husband in the Air Force, and he's from Chicago. I'm from New Jersey. So, hanging out in Dayton, Ohio, and now Cincinnati, Ohio, it's sort of in between. So it'll work out best.
Eileen, was your husband in the Air Force as well?
Yes. My husband was in the Air Force, and he was a career officer. After 6 years, I got an assignment to go to grad school, and I kind of said, I don't think I want to do that because that then required an additional commitment. So after 6 years, I left. But because my husband was military, I looked for a great big company that was near Dayton that I could work at, that other people would know about, so that in case he moved, then I'd have an opportunity to at least have a nice other experience on my resume. And that's how I wound up at P&G.
And those who are listening to the podcast here, whether they're in college and so forth, your degree, I believe it was mathematics. Was your
math? Yes, I was a math major at Wellesley.
Man,
which means I'm a good problem solver.
Well, so one more follow-up question that before Ray talks with you about your time at P&G. You made the comment a minute ago about just how much our military does entrust what goes on with these really young, brave, very capable men and women that whether they're enlisted, whether they're officers, you name it. It's really remarkable.
Yes.
Would you also, during my time, I was a lowly data analyst, not doing exciting projects like what you were doing, not taking anything away from my colleagues, but one of the things that really stuck out to me, two things as it relates to the military and kind of what I'll call global supply chain, is that commitment to get it done, whatever it takes, right? The creative problem solving that goes on, whether it's wartime, war environment, or all the other missions that the military carries out during peacetime, it's extraordinary. And then the esprit de corps that goes with that, where you've got a family, my supervisor would check in on me, stop by my dorm, just to see how I was doing. It was really, truly a family that I believe, at least in my experiences, working for manufacturers primarily, there's a lot of that same esprit de corps and camaraderie. How do your observations and experiences square with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly from a work experience, that get it done, figure it out. I mean, I can relate a bit to or relay an experience that we had. Things weren't going so well with the primary manufacturer. We had to find a second source. And again, back to the responsibility that was given me. I was the project manager to find a second source for this massive piece of equipment. And, of course, we had a team and we worked together, but, as I compare the work that I did in the Air Force to my first responsibilities at P&G, I was extremely well trained to be resourceful, to be accountable, to take the lead, to figure out how to get things done. And also to rely on a team, because you can't do everything yourself. And I think that life in the Air Force or life in the military is a family. You're working with other people that are focused on the same mission. And things like, my husband was on a softball team, and, it was just great fun to go to those games because the conversation in the stands, it wasn't a work conversation. We weren't talking about the job, but we were talking about our lives that happened to be focused on, what was going on in the military at the time.
I love
so it was
that.
a great experience. I loved being in the military.
Thank you for sharing. Ray, where are we headed next?
Well, we're headed to talk a little bit about P&G, and she talked about how she was very well trained and really just using the math skills and problem solving. And, when I look at what's happening today, whether it be, the supply chain issues, we are thrown in a situation where we have a lot more problems that we've never encountered before. So having that skill set of how do you define a problem before you just jump into and throwing solutions. So I would like to hear a little bit more about your P&G experience, but which role really shaped your worldview? Which role in your many years of P&G kind of stood out with you to say, that's the role that helped define and help me see really just the world through a different lens?
Sure. It was actually a job that I took probably after I was at P&G for about 6 years. So I started in manufacturing. It's interesting. They hired me in manufacturing because I think they thought that I, had this group of military folks that were under my command. And that wasn't the kind of military experience that I had. Of course, I didn't have anybody who was reporting to me. So I went into manufacturing, and I was a team manager. I had people on my team that ran the manufacturing operation.
Which product or what were you making?
I started at Ivordale at the oldest P&G facility.
St. Bernard?
St. Bernard, making Ivory soap. And then, it continued on to other soaps in the manufacturing site. But, real classic manufacturing. And it was a wonderful experience for me because certainly I was able to demonstrate my ability to lead and to get a team focused on a common goal, deliver against that objective. And when you run into challenges or problems, you pause to understand what those are and you try to fix the problem at the root cause. As I left manufacturing, I picked up a responsibility where I was leading North American beauty care capital purchasing. So that means any of the equipment that we needed in manufacturing. And it was a wonderful kind of career transition for me because I went into procurement, which was oddly very much the work that I did when I was in the military was procurement, although I wasn't called a procurement manager. But it really, it made use of my technical skills, the skills that I developed when I was going through school, the skills that, I kind of honed a little bit in the military, and certainly what I lived with day in and day out in manufacturing, running a manufacturing line, making sure that the line is efficient, reliable, all that kind of stuff. But then I was in a position where I was working with engineers and various vendors to make the kind of equipment that we needed for various startups that we had in beauty care capital. And at the time, while I had responsibility for North America, I was working with a global team because we put global standard equipment in place in many, many instances for P&G. So it was the first time that I had a chance to work with teams from China, teams from the UK, wherever we had a beauty care manufacturing plant, we needed this equipment. So working with with buyers from other countries, I got an appreciation for the different way that things are done in a corporate environment. And despite P&G wanting to be standard, there were certainly some things that could and couldn't be done depending upon where you were putting your equipment. So that was really a fabulous opportunity for me to see how business is done outside the US. It was a fabulous chance for me to get to know people of other cultures. And it's something that then I continue to do for the rest of my career. I always, wanted to do something that was global, working on global teams.
And Procter and Gamble has a phenomenal reputation of really building and manufacturing these kind of, self-driven, empowered work groups. And there was something even recent about how they were able to succeed, in the pandemic because of that, self-driven team. So my guess is they're looking for your leadership skills because it tied to their leadership style of wanting leaders who trusted and cared about their employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I was, as the pandemic came around, my last job at P&G, I was responsible for global real estate and facilities. So I had the responsibility for all of our manufacturing sites around the globe and making sure that those facilities were able to do what they needed. Kind of said in a shorthand way, I was the queen of janitorial services. So bathrooms needed to be cleaned, the lawns needed to be mowed, the cafeterias needed somebody to be, in the kitchen cooking. Anything that is needed in a facility in order for that facility to serve the purpose of the employees, that was my job. I went out and found the suppliers to do that work. And we put a very large service program in place where we worked with a single company, and that single company provided our services all around the globe. And that enabled us a tremendous amount of standardization. Yet that company was very clear on the fact that every country is different. Every culture is different. And in particular, when you're cooking food for people, you're not putting the standard peanut butter approach in place. So that was a really great job. And I'm really happy that we were able to accomplish that as we moved into COVID, because then if you think about, okay, I've got to have my folks show up to do a manufacturing job.
Right.
Need to take temperatures, having a company that could just do that in a standard way across 100 plus manufacturing sites was a tremendous level of efficiency that P&G was able to take advantage of that many other companies could not.
Yeah. Don't be surprised if you're getting some phone calls after this interview, given some of your skill set, some of your key skill set and experiences you're sharing around this procurement and sourcing. And we all know these last few years how important, how that really finally, we've always talked about supply chain finally getting a seat at the table. Well, a lot of procurement pros are saying the same thing now about how procurement finally is getting the recognition that it deserves and the strategic value that it deserves. So who knows, folks, be looking to pick your brain in this procurement important environment.
Everybody took for granted the supply chain until it didn't work.
Right. Absolutely.
We all take for granted toilet paper until we don't have it.
Well, and all of that aside, back when I was in metal stamping, and as I was mainly working on new projects, right, for a company here in Georgia, and we'd be bidding on certain assemblies and whatnot. Well, I leaned heavily on our supply chain manager to be able to find the suppliers that could bring the certain parts we're after. And one of my Eureka moments, I want to ask you about yours here in a minute, Eileen, but what I learned in that role some 10 years ago or so is it's not easy to pick up a phone and find a good quality supplier, whether you're trying to replace a supplier or trying to just find a new supplier for a new project. It is really, really tough. And I think the world, folks that maybe that was in their blind spot in recent years, I think are learning that same lesson. But when you think about Eureka moments, Eileen, whether it's one from your P&G days, one from right now, because we're about to talk about last mile food rescue, or during your military days, what's a key Eureka moment that comes back to you from time to time?
Especially now as we're thinking about, or we just came through the holiday period. I remember I was out walking my dog, and it was a period of time where I was having a lot of challenges with the supplier that we had in place that was doing some global work for us. And I remember thinking as I was on this walk, if I could just make it through Christmas. And I paused when I realized that I said to myself, if I can just make it through Christmas, what? That's crazy. What's going on here? Why am I thinking about just making it through Christmas? And it really caused me to pause and think about what was happening with the supplier. And, you mentioned, Scott, that it's not easy to just pick up the phone. in this instance, it's not easy to let go of a supplier that you've been working with for 4 or 5 years just because something's not working. So it was really a eureka moment for me in the sense that we really needed to pause, take away, oh, I'm P&G, I'm going to buy this way, I'm going to get, what I need for a certain amount of money. We really needed both parties to sit at the table and talk about what they needed in order to be successful. What was required on the supplier side, what's required on the P&G side, and if there's a way that we can make both parties successful, winning on both sides of the table, that was a really critical moment for me where I knew about it intellectually, but I absolutely experienced it at that moment when I thought, no, I don't want to just get through Christmas. I want to enjoy Christmas.
Right.
I'm only going to enjoy Christmas if I sit down at the table with the supplier and we sort this thing out. We figure out how together to work through this problem.
Eileen, that is such a gorgeous picture you just painted. And, we oftentimes talk here around here about how supply chain makes it happen. I think there's so much a world can learn in all kinds of circles from how things happen in supply chain, including what you just shared there. But Ray, get you to weigh in on the eureka moment Eileen just shared.
So I know P&G has a program like Connect and Develop. I don't know if that's consistent with what you're talking about there. And so it's really a place for people to grow and see the standards the same way. Eileen mentioned standardization when you're taking across, all the different areas. People see standardization often as a negative. Oh, you're trying to create a cookie cutter. No, standardization and having these high standards means we agree on the same promise. Okay, so standards are what is good. And often we confuse standards with best practice. Best practice is how do we do it? Standards are what we agree on is what is good. And often when we don't agree on what is good, I see a problem that somebody else doesn't. And that is a root of conflict. That is one of the biggest areas is when I see my daughter doing something that she shouldn't be doing and she doesn't see anything wrong with it. Oh my goodness, as father of 3 daughters. So having standards, for example, my girls, the standard is you can wear it if you see mommy wear it. There's the standard. Okay. I don't have to say no to everything, does it work? No, but at least there's a standard that they know daddy's not going to be happy with this. So, but I think that what Eileen said about, I just want to get through Christmas. What she said is, I'm not going to accept just getting by with it.
Right.
I'm going to identify what's broken here. Why is it not acceptable? Because often people just then lower their standards. Right. And then just accept it. And then you just, push the problem for future years. I think what Eileen did is said, no, I have to change my mindset that no, I don't want to just get through Christmas. I have high standards. Now, rather than just replace them, it's like no different technology. Let's just get rid of technology. No, maybe the technology is not the problem, but maybe it's behaviors. So she used her problem solving ability to say, okay, here are the standards. I need to make sure that they know that we're not meeting them. Either the standards are wrong or they're not consistent about them. And let's sit down with them and make sure that they can react to me telling them. So my suspicion is her conversation with them told her whether or not there's a high likelihood that they're actually going to listen, agree with it, commit to doing it, and then actually doing it.
Yes, that. And I would say, Ray, it was also on the flip side. So, we had a very clear expectation of the standard that needed to be achieved. It wasn't being achieved. And when you dig deeper and you find out why, it's because P&G wasn't delivering on their responsibilities. And when you think about a global company, a global contract, there's many, many, many entities that don't operate exactly the same way as the manufacturing site in Cincinnati, Ohio. And understanding that and peeling back the layers to figure out what needs to be changed, what needs to be improved. It just takes time, but it needs dedication that no, it's not the buyer that's slamming the responsibility on the supplier. And if they don't deliver, well, then you move away.
Right.
It's really understanding what's needed on both sides to be successful.
And I think if I just can add one thing here, because I think this is a critical part for the people in the audience is people are trying now to get their supply chains to respond to them. Right now, people have more business than they have capacity. So if you come at them the automotive way of, hey, you know what, if you don't deliver for us, you're gone. I can tell you, I mean, I was, running purchasing for a printing company years ago. And then as a part of growing a business that was trying to scale quickly, when I went to do supplier assessments, the first 3 questions I asked was, what are we doing to make it hard to do business with? So you've got to create a place where they can complain about working with you. And then you've got to react quickly to those comments. For example, I remember one of them was, our trucks show up to your dock and have to wait too long.
Yeah.
Okay. One of them is you keep changing the schedule. One of them is you don't pay your bills on time. Okay.
Still a challenge.
Correct.
Still a challenge.
But if we don't acknowledge that, how can we possibly get them to shift some of their capacity to us if we don't do our part?
Right.
Yep.
So we've got to be a premier customer so they could be a premier supplier.
I like that. Owning, instead of always looking to point fingers, what both of you are speaking to is also looking inward to see how we, where, as Eileen, as you mentioned, where are we not honoring the promise, and what else could we be doing to make the situation, relationship, partnership work better? So I appreciate that. That takes a certain level of humility, and you don't always find that in leaders across business. I want to shift gears. I feel like Eileen, we're going to have you back. I feel like there's a supply chain master class here between you and Ray that we could facilitate and have a lot of fun with. But we want to talk about what you're up to now. I know Ray's a big fan. Ray actually is a volunteer with this organization, and we want to. So let's start with finding out more kind of level setting. Last Mile Food Rescue, where you serve as COO. What is the organization? What do they do?
So Last Mile Food Rescue focuses on 2 big challenges that we're facing across the world, but in particular in North America and the United States. 40% of all the food, the good, healthy food that we produce goes in the trash can. And it either goes in the trash can, our personal trash cans at home, or more importantly, it goes in the waste dump at major grocers, restaurants, event centers, caterers, hotels, you name it. If they produce food, they're wasting it. And we're not talking about banana peels. We're talking about good food that people could still take advantage of and lead a healthy life if they were to receive it. And so Last Mile Food Rescue is essentially a logistics organization. We figure out where that waste is generated. We make agreements with those food donors. We empower a 100% volunteer community of drivers that bring that food from the point of waste to agencies that are supporting those facing food insecurity. If we could capture just 1/4 of the amount of food that's being wasted, we could solve the problem of food insecurity. And that's what we're going to do in Cincinnati.
Wow.
We're going to eliminate food insecurity.
I love that mission, and you're right. We have such a big challenge. Some of our other interviews that we have put together as we dove in a little more to this the food waste challenge, but also the food insecurity challenge, and why in the world can we not figure it out? What I've learned, and please share, is in Europe they address these. They've made progress because they're addressing it differently. Policy, regulations, penalties, and whatnot. Kind of the more of the stick versus the carrot. And here we're kind of behind the progress they've made there. Massive opportunity. What does it take to get folks to take action that you, in your experiences here? What do you see? What's that final motivating factor? Like, yes, we got to do something about it.
So I think that people don't want to waste food. It's just a lot easier to put it out in the trash heap than to figure out what to do. We've got a lot of generous people out there. This concept of rescuing food is not a new one. People are picking up bread from their local Panera or where have you and taking it to the soup kitchen all over the US. It happens, but it's not organized.
Right.
And so all that we're focused on is how can we put that organizing mechanism in place so that from point A to point B, we've got the most efficient efficient method. Companies like Kroger don't want to throw food away.
Right.
But if you think about what goes on in a grocery store, it's a highly minimum wage workforce, especially now in the midst of real workforce challenges. Finding people to stay and do those kinds of jobs is a real issue. And so they don't want to be in a position where, well, guy that runs the produce department, you've got to save the food on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Thursdays, every other Thursday, it's in the afternoon, because that's when somebody's got some free time to come and pick it up.
Right.
I mean, they're not going to put up with that kind of thing. So if we can put a reliable, efficient, repeatable process in place, it solves their problem. They're able to get monetary benefits in terms of a tax relief. They're not, filling up the dumpster with good food. Right. So it's a win-win all around. But the key is putting a good, efficient process in place for them, so that it's easier for them to donate their food than to throw it in the trash.
That's what I wrote down. You got to make it easy.
Mm-hmm.
If you make it easy, they'll do it. I think as Eileen just mentioned, it's too difficult to do it on your own.
I'll take it a step further based on my 2-minute quick study. It's make it easy, but make them aware, right? They've got to be aware of this great solution that's out there that allows them to act on what they, as Eileen puts it, what they want to do anyway, right? I don't know about y'all. I hate throwing food out, right? I hate it. I really do. So I love to hear the solution y'all have crafted to do what Ray said, make it easy for folks to get good food to folks that can really use it. Ray, before we talk with Eileen about when she joined and what she does as COO, you're being a volunteer, you're kind of, I think you're on the front lines kind of the operation. So in a nutshell, tell us about what you do in your role as a volunteer.
So in my role is I look for where is there available food using this phenomenal app. And it's an amazing technology. You mentioned, the sour bread starter. Somebody created a starter that allowed Last Mile Food Rescue to kind of leap forward quickly. Let Eileen explain that. But so like this morning, I looked up, says what's available. There's produce in Castellini. I said, I will take that rescue. So it's similar to Uber. Who's available? So I took it from Castellini and I took it to, I think it was Last Harvest or Last Bread down in downtown Cincinnati.
Like a food shelter or food bank?
Food bank, yes. And I mean, the app is amazing. And I click on it and then it tells me exactly how to get there. Gives me the information exactly. So I filled up the car this morning with produce. And this is the part that I guess was my aha for me. I took another rescue to a food pantry. And what they said is how much this produce and this fresh vegetables and fresh fruit brings dignity to people. And if you think of, food pantries, it's typically in the past, and people's mind is it's canned food, things that can last a long time. What Last Mile Food Rescue is doing is it's getting the close to, still good, but how do we rescue it before it goes bad? So I have, taken chicken, meat, milk, orange juice, donuts. And it was amazing. I took a donuts one time to a place and they said, we have a lot of kids here. So, for me, it's really fine. So I'm the Uber driver. Eileen and her team are finding the, places that want to donate, and then they're finding the places to take it to. And we're just a conduit.
Yes. You're the logistics, Ray. Ever think you'd be operating a logistics company, Ray?
And the thing that makes it so easy for us is, again, I can pull up this app here and it tells me, here's all the, here's what's available tomorrow, and then I can say, you know what, I will take this from Kroger to the kitchen, Queen City Kitchen. It's from 7:30 to 9, or I can do a weekly one where you could do the same route every week. Now, ideally, I'd love for companies who are watching this to say, we'd like to be that corporate sponsor, and we'll have a different employee do that. It's just, for volunteers, it's great because it's as you would like to do it.
You can plug
And
in.
Saturday, the girls canceled their game because of COVID. Guess what? I'm looking up what's going on Saturday. Today, I decided to do 2. And it's great because one of them even says, call ahead, because if we don't have anything, don't waste your time. So I called ahead and they said, you know what? We just gave it all out. Great. That actually even saves me time. But I just thought just the dignity of the freshness of this.
Yes.
It's not, again, I can't think of a time I've taken anything that is not perishable. And they love it. They love the perishable items. And
So-
they make it easy for me as a volunteer.
So it sounds like, Eileen, that your app gets high scores when it comes to UX and VX, user experience and volunteer experience. And that's really cool to see. So let's just for the sake of time, let's talk about what you kind of shift gears a bit as Chief Operating Officer of Last Mile Food Rescue. Where do you spend your time? What's your favorite part of your role?
So early, and we've only been open for a little over a year. Early in my tenure in this position, I was out on the road. I was doing rescues. I was finding out what we were getting from Castellini. I was understanding the complexity of working with that app. It is very, very user-friendly. It takes you step by step through the process, but I wanted to personally have that experience because we only exist with the 250 on a regular basis people that are out there on the road moving food for us. So I really wanted to dig into their experience. As time progressed, I recognized that as good as the app is from a user experience, the back end is very manual. So just like any supply chain, you know, there's risk in the unknown. We would really like to be able to think about, okay, there's food that's available. It can go to a number of different places. How do I come up with a methodology to say food, this type of food, these are the agencies that are available, this is the zip codes that they're located in. How do I put a very effective mapping and matching process in place? How do I do that with technology? Because I'm a nonprofit. I've got a really small team. I've got a wonderful, a mighty team. They're very, very bright people. But still, that mapping and matching is very manual for me. I do that all behind the scenes so that Ray has a really great experience. I want my rescues to be less than an hour. I want the food that's picked up from Kroger or from a convenience store or from an event center. If you think about it, those are 3 different types of food. You know, I'm not going to take the big load of vegetables from Castellini to an after school program. They're going to want the bottles of milk that I get from UDF, ready to eat food. So that whole concept of mapping and matching is a real important problem that has not been solved in the food rescue business. So that's where I'm spending a good bit of my time is on the technology and figuring out how we can do things far more efficiently, leveraging technology to take the place of right now, which is a lot of manual labor on the part of my team.
Gotcha.
And then I'm also spending a lot of my time, you know, I feel like I trained for 28 years at P&G to do this job because I've got a wonderful staff and, you know, just coaching and developing them. They're all very young, coaching and developing them, teaching them things that frankly, I didn't think about the fact that I knew as much as I do. So, you know, there's a problem and I'm able to say, well, did you think about it this way? And, you know, there's this technology that this methodology we used at P&G called 3 whys. And you just ask why 5 times, 5 whys rather, ask why 5 times. And eventually you get to the root cause or, you know, a fishbone analysis or a Pareto analysis or, you know, some very, very basic tools and methodologies that are used to solve problems that I'm able to train my young staff. And it's just really rewarding for me to see what they're able to do.
I love
it. I'm gonna validate something because I can tell you I did 2 deliveries, one to Bethany House and one to Lighthouse Youth Services. And what I brought them was for the kids.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, the produce, where I would bring that to, the
Or
one
food kitchen.
food pantry who has, 150 families, mostly immigrants, that they wanted fresh produce. So whatever you're doing on that part, I can see it as a volunteer because I can see the good connection between the two.
Good.
All right, man. So much to talk about. So little time. Always is the case. So clearly, y'all have come a long way in just a little bit of time being in existence, around a year. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, we
Okay.
started in November of 2020. Here it is,
Wow.
2022.
Okay, so
And then
let's go ahead, Ray.
let me jump in. Speaking of 2022, so Eileen, as you look at 2022,
Hang on, Ray. Hang on 1 minute. We'll get
please.
there. I want to give Eileen the opportunity to brag on that nimble, capable, powerful team that she's leading. So, and then we'll get to the global supply chain landscape in 2022. But looking back at 2021, and thank you, Ray. Looking back at 2021, and you think about all the traction y'all have made, all the accomplishments, you name it, come a long way. What's one thing that you are most proud of? That last mile food rescue. Sorry.
I would have to say that it's what we were able to rescue. So we started the year not having any idea how many people would want to be our Uber drivers,
Right.
so to speak. How many food donors would sign up with us? How many agencies would trust us? Because we're brand new in this business. I mean, we got some smart people on the team, but I never ran a nonprofit. I hadn't really operated in this food business. So we put out a goal that we were going to find 350,000 pounds of food. Well, we rescued 1.7 million pounds of food this past year.
Goodness gracious.
So we had this terminology at P&G. We called it sandbagging. You'd come in and say, "Oh, I can do such and such." That wasn't a sandbag. That was we just didn't know. We just didn't understand. It wasn't like we were under promising. We just had no idea. And the great thing about my team is that, we always talked about the fact that we're a startup. We're going to have to be nimble. We're going to have to think about, we learn one day, we apply the learnings the next day, we learn some more. So we're constantly pivoting as we learn new things. So our food glide path, so to speak, our donation glide path changed as we learned, what really was available from a company like Castellini, what was available from a company like United Dairy Farmers that were all in. They wanted us to rescue food from 90 of their stores, like all at once. We couldn't do it all at once, but over time, we made some pretty significant progress. And I'm really looking forward to 2022 and to see what that turns into.
I am too. 1.7 million pounds of food rescued. I got the number right.
And how many meals is that approximately?
So it's about 1.6 million meals. Yeah,
Wow.
There's a fancy calculation that Feeding America has determined based on the variety of foods that are rescued, the weights of different foods, and what would amount to a meal that would feed a family. So.
Wow. All right. So Ray, I'm gonna pass the baton to you in just a second. I know you're excited, like as am I, to learn what Eileen's looking at broader. But one quick observation. The last couple of years, as between the lockdown and the challenges and the differences between commercial food supply chains and institutional, I'm hoping when it comes to innovation, it comes to that matching and mapping that you're talking about, Eileen, and how do we save more? I'm hoping we can build more parallels so that if we hit challenges with milk or institutionalized certain products and they hit disruption, how can we divert it so that less of that goes to waste? So we'll see. But I love it. It's going to take what powerful startups like Last Mile Food Rescue is doing for the rest of the industry to learn from. So thank you for what you do, you and your team there. 1.7 million pounds. Okay, Ray, where are we going next with Eileen?
Well, before we go there, you mentioned milk. So I was watching something that talked about virtual reality for cows, where they're putting new goggles on cows so the cows can see pastures rather than being inside and actually can produce more milk.
Love it.
So you talked about artificial intelligence earlier. Now we can get into virtual reality and figure out how to connect the right cow with the right kids for the milk.
So you're saying maybe a moo-averse. Ooh.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes. Yeah. Well, I think the other one was the Mootrix.
We can keep going with the
Exactly.
mom and dad jokes, right?
Yes, it was. So I think the area that Eileen just mentioned about what they're doing, the amount of food and the team that she has, I think they're going to be able to do a lot of great things. Moving into 2022, when you look at the global supply chain outside of last mile food rescue, just your experience and your knowledge of what's going on, what are the 2 or 3 topics that you're thinking about at this moment?
One of them is education. So you mentioned, Scott, making sure that people are aware of this problem. When the 3 of us were kids, there wasn't really any such thing as recycling, right? I mean, I remember my brother had a paper route and my mom had a big old station wagon, and we'd go about gathering the newspapers, and then you'd go to the station and be weighed, and then you get paid for the amount of newspaper. That was my recycling experience as a kid. And we were unusual. It wasn't normal to be loading up your station wagon with newspapers and getting a few dollars. But now, of course, everybody recycles. It's part of our psyche, it's what we do. I'm hopeful that as this concept of food rescue gets more and more attention, as people recognize that it's a problem and it's a problem that can be solved, and it can be solved in a really wonderful way that helps those that are facing food insecurity, that it'll become far more endemic, that, it's just the way that we think, the way that we operate. So that's one of the things that I'm working on is education. The other is, something that every supply chain faces is just the risk of the unknown, right? Things change. But if we can have a better appreciation based on our history, based on our data, know what's happened before and what the needs are that have been identified before, we then are in a far better position to do that pivot thing that's necessary when all of a sudden you don't have as much milk from one source as you've had in the past. How do you pivot and make sure that those needs are met effectively based on what happened previously?
Yep.
So speaking of education, let's take a quick second here, and I think it's an important piece. You mentioned 40% of the food goes to waste. Let's talk about food insecurity. Let's level set and define it. What is food insecurity?
Food insecurity is essentially anyone who does not know where their next meal is coming from. So we differentiate food insecurity from hunger, because all 3 of us could be hungry because we didn't get lunch today.
Right.
But that's not the same as being food insecure, where you do not know when or where you will get your next meal. So it could be, we've got a situation in Cincinnati this week where the schools are closed because of COVID. And, kids are being fed in school. They get their meals in school. And so we've got a very major project that Last Mile Food Rescue is working together with the Free Store Food Bank to set up operations where families can come by and get that food that the children would have received in school. So, I think this concept of food insecurity is, it's essentially helping people. I'd like to take that issue off the table, to use a procurement term. Take the issue of food off the table, because if people can get their nutrition needs met, then they can focus on spending their dollars on transportation, utilities, rent. They don't have to think about education for their kids, because their kids are in school and they're well fed.
Right.
They can focus on their own needs to get a better lifestyle for themselves, get the training, the education that they need. Because this food issue it's not a problem, it's taken care of.
And there was a school in Avondale that I was volunteering with, and they said 55 kids come to school every day hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually have a groom room, and then they have to feed them, because if they're hungry, they're not able to focus. And as you mentioned, when there's long breaks for winter, they don't have food, but also it costs their families more money
Right.
What percentage, education-wise, of Cincinnati? How many? What's the population that is in a situation where their food is not secure?
Pre-COVID, it was 1 in 7 people were facing food insecurity, and now it's 1 in 5 in the midst of COVID. And of course, we're trying to affect that in a very big way in collaboration with the Free Store Food Bank.
Yeah, so 20% of the population in a very healthy economy and a very healthy city is in this situation.
Well, I'm glad, that's a somber note for sure. And it's something we all got to do about. We all must do something about. But the good news here is with the awesome work that Last Mile Food Rescue is doing, the needle is being moved. And that is, and now if we can, going back to your enterprise way back earlier in the interview, when you talked about, the global industry and there were those islands of excellence. Well, there's a lot of communities, I'm hoping, that can learn from your story, learn from what y'all are doing about it, and can help folks in need in their own communities. So thank you very much for taking time to share y'all's incredible story, given how long y'all have been at it. The mission's been that y'all been leading the mission. We're hoping that 2022 is your most successful year yet, but far beyond. Kidding aside, wishing you all the best as the organization continues to grow its wherewithal and help more and more folks by saving food that would otherwise, be headed to the garbage or what's the word I'm thinking of?
Landfill.
Thank you very much, Ray. Hey, some days are better than others when it comes to my vocabulary.
It's easier to sit here and just watch you think and speak at the same time. I don't know how you do this. You do an amazing job with these podcasts, by the way.
Well, I appreciate it. But great guests, great show, and even better, wonderful purpose, exceptional mission, even better show. So thank you so much to you both, Eileen, for the story, and Ray for your voluntary work with Last Mile Food Rescue. But for our listening audience, before we wrap here with Eileen Budo and Ray Attiyah, I want both of y'all. I'm going to pose this question to both of y'all. So if you think about a room full of young folks that you have their captive attention, right? You've got that they're completely undivided attention, and they're all wanting to break into global supply chain and progress into senior levels of leadership. What's a piece or two of critical advice that you'd offer them? And Eileen, let's start with you.
I think the best employees I've ever coached and developed have been the curious ones, the ones that are not afraid to ask why. I mentioned a methodology at P&G, ask why 5 times to get to the root cause. The new employee that asks why, that stays curious, that's always interested in learning more, in contrast to telling me how much they know, is the employee that I'm going to invest time in, that I'm going to expect a really wonderful career trajectory, because they're not stuck in what they know. They're seeking to know what they don't know and learn more and continue to learn as they continue in their career.
I love that. Folks, stay curious and act on that curiosity is what I heard Eileen just share. Ray, what would you add?
I think the greatest value is between the seams. When I look at a supply chain, if you're into logistics, there's individual processes, but the biggest waste or the biggest opportunity is when different functions, organizations have to connect. Eileen mentioned some of this stuff with her P&G work. So I think my suggestion to people is reject the incentives to optimize one function. And often those incentives are set up as, measures and so forth, and really look at the whole system. Look at the process, look at the whole system. And I think that if you want to, work your way into a senior leadership role or a role where you have greater influence, you're somebody who can see the whole system and not try to, in some cases, you may have to make one function, harder or eliminate it, to benefit the whole system.
Mm.
And I think that, system thinking approach is super critical. So you have to have a vision of what the end result looks like before you get into trying to optimize one function.
Love it. I love that. I completely, wholeheartedly agree with you both. And I appreciate you offering up that advice to our listeners. Okay. Listeners, now you can take action. You can connect with both of these folks. You can get behind what they're doing at Last Mile Food Rescue. How can folks, Eileen, connect with you and the team and the organization? Maybe even act to help the mission forward?
Sure. So real easy website you can go to, lastmilefood.org. You can connect with me, Eileen, at lastmilefood.org. You can also connect with a company called Food Rescue Hero. They are the company that has created our app, our mobile technology. Wonderful partner to us. So any of those ways would be a great next step for any of your listeners interested.
Awesome. We're going to make it really easy. We're going to drop those things in the show notes. And so our listeners are one click away from the episode page. So big thanks to Eileen Budo with Last Mile Food Rescue. Okay, Ray, you're not getting out of this question either. You, as you stated earlier on the front end of the show, through some of your dealings, you now got a little more free time on your hands. You're doing good things, clearly, as we've identified here with that time. But if folks are curious, you've dropped a ton of knowledge on this one. Both of y'all have, by the way, and we're going to have to bring y'all back for that supply chain masterclass, Eileen and Ray. But how can folks connect with you?
So for me, my preference is LinkedIn. So I've got my LinkedIn, Ray Attiyah there. I put a lot of content from my books. You can see one here, one there. They can go on Amazon. I would also say for those of you on LinkedIn, follow Last Mile Food Rescue. And as Eileen just mentioned, the Food Rescue Heroes, for those of you outside of Cincinnati, they can be the Eileen in those other cities and kick this off and, make this go. So for me, it's LinkedIn is probably the best. Obviously, I've got a Twitter at Ray Attiyah. Those are the two best places to connect with me.
Wonderful. It's just that easy. Well, again, a big thanks to Eileen Budo, COO with Last Mile Food Rescue. Thanks so much, Eileen.
Thank you, Scott. It was great to be with you. Thanks for introducing me to your audience.
Hey, you bet. Love the mission y'all are doing, and better yet, love the progress. 1.7 million pounds. That is an organization on the move. Ray Attiyah, really appreciate you jumping in the co-host chair and also introducing us to all the good things that Last Mile Food Rescue is up to.
Oh, Scott, you make it so much fun. It's energizing. I miss seeing you, miss working with you. So thank you for having us.
You bet. We've got a series here. And by the way, thank you, Ray. We're going to have to do a lot more collaboration and a lot more interviews. We have a series here at Supply Chain Now that Vector Global Logistics leads for us. Enrique Alvarez over there, and it's entitled Logistics with Purpose. And I'll tell you, this conversation here today, if that doesn't illustrate exactly what that is, logistics with that noble purpose, I don't know what is. So I'm so glad that needs that we have in our communities and the nonprofits that serve them are able to tap such incredible leaders as we've heard from here today. So we'll have to bring on Eileen back later in 2022 and get an update on the progress. But listeners, if y'all have enjoyed this episode as much as I have, check us out, supplychainnow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, if you take anything away from this conversation, take this away, please. On behalf of our entire team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton and Ray Attiyah signing off for now, challenging you to be like Eileen. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. On that note, we'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.